Matthew, please. My father's grave isn't even covered with dirt yet." Amelia's voice broke as she clutched her 7-month pregnant belly, her black dress soaked through by the freezing October rain. Matthew didn't even look at her. He adjusted his silk tie, his eyes fixed on his ringing phone. "It's over, Amelia. You're a burden I can no longer carry. Your father was a janitor who left you nothing but debt and a closet full of rags. I'm moving on to someone who actually has a future." As he walked away, leaving her alone in the mud of the cemetery, Amelia didn't know that the worn envelope in her pocket didn't just contain a goodbye. It contained a secret that would turn her husband's future into a nightmare of regret. The air in the hospital room had been thick with the smell of antiseptic and the rhythmic, haunting hiss of the ventilator. Amelia had sat in that hard plastic chair for 48 hours straight, her hand enveloped in her father's calloused, rough palm. Arthur Richardson had been a janitor at the local elementary school for 35 years. He was a man of few words but infinite love, a man who smelled like pine sol and peppermint, whose hands were stained with the honest work of 1,000 scrubbed floors. To the world he was invisible. To Amelia he was the sun. "Amelia," he had whispered, his voice a ghost of its former strength. "The shoebox, in the closet, the false bottom. Trust the plan, baby girl. You are never alone. You are never poor." She had thought he was delirious. They had lived in a 1-bedroom apartment for most of her life. He had driven a truck that was more rust than metal, so she could have the best vitamins for her pregnancy. He had eaten lukewarm soup for weeks, so she could buy a designer crib she didn't need. But then the heart monitor had flatlined. The silence that followed was the loudest sound Amelia had ever heard. Now, standing at the edge of the evergreen cemetery, the silence was back, broken only by the wet thud of dirt hitting the mahogany casket. Amelia felt a sharp kick in her ribs. The baby was restless. "Matthew," she whispered, reaching for her husband's hand. "It's so cold." Matthew pulled his hand away, as if her touch were a contagion. He was staring at his Apple Watch, his jaw tight. "We've been here for 40 minutes, Amelia. The service is over. I have a closing meeting for the Sterling account. I can't be late." "The Sterling account?" Amelia's eyes widened, blurred by tears and rain. "Your father-in-law was just buried. My only parent. Don't you care at all?" Matthew let out a sharp, jagged sigh of annoyance. "Look, Amelia, let's be real. Your dad was a great guy, I guess. But he was a janitor. He didn't have a 401k, he didn't have assets. He spent his last dime on those hospital bills that I'm probably going to end up paying. I've spent the last 3 years playing the supportive husband while you played nurse to a dying old man. I'm exhausted." The words felt like a physical slap. Amelia stepped back, her heels sinking into the soft graveyard mud. "Exhausted? You're exhausted because I cared for my dying father." "I'm going," Matthew said, checking his phone again. A smile, a real, genuine smile, flickered on his lips for a split second as he read a notification. "I'll see you at the apartment later. Take an Uber. I have the car." He didn't offer her his umbrella. He didn't help her navigate the slippery slope toward the road. He simply turned and walked toward his silver BMW, the car Amelia's father had helped them get a loan for by co-signing with his meager life savings. Amelia watched the red taillights disappear into the grey mist. She stood there until her feet were numb, clutching the worn work jacket her father had left behind. She reached into the pocket, her fingers brushing against a thick, cream-colored envelope. She hadn't opened it yet. She couldn't. Opening it meant he was really gone. By the time she made it back to their small, cramped apartment, the sun had set, leaving the city in a dismal, bruised purple hue. The apartment was strangely quiet. Matthew's gym bag was gone from the entryway. Amelia sat on the edge of the sofa, her back aching from the weight of the baby. She pulled out her phone to call Matthew, to apologize for being difficult, to beg him to come home so they could just grieve together. But before she could dial, a notification popped up on her Instagram feed. Vanessa. C Marketing tagged Matthew Rich, real estate, in a post. Amelia's heart stuttered. Vanessa Chen was Matthew's boss, a polished, ruthless woman who wore power suits that cost more than Amelia's entire wardrobe. She clicked the notification. It was a photo taken at the Gilded Lily, the most expensive rooftop bar in the city. The city lights sparkled in the background. In the foreground, Matthew was sitting in a velvet booth, a glass of vintage scotch in one hand. Vanessa was draped over him, her hand sporting a massive pear-cut diamond resting on his chest. The caption read, "Celebrating new beginnings with my king. Out with the old, in with the gold." Power couple. Engaged, new life. The timestamp, 1 hour ago. Amelia felt the world tilt. While she was standing in the rain, burying the man who had raised her, her husband was celebrating his engagement to his mistress. The front door clicked open. Matthew walked in, smelling of expensive scotch and Vanessa's cloying, floral perfume. He didn't look like a man who had just come from a funeral. He looked like a man who had just won the lottery. He saw Amelia sitting there, her eyes red, her phone screen glowing with the image of his betrayal. He didn't flinch. He didn't apologize. He simply pulled a manila folder from his briefcase and tossed it onto the coffee table. "I assume you saw the post," Matthew said, his voice cold and clinical. "Good. That saves us the drama. Those are the divorce papers, Amelia. Sign them tonight. I want you out of here by Monday." Amelia stared at the folder, then at the man she thought she knew. "Monday? Matthew, I'm 7 months pregnant. I have nowhere to go. My father's apartment lease expires next week." "Not my problem," Matthew snapped, loosening his tie. "You can go back to the slums you came from. Maybe you can find another janitor job to support that kid. I'm moving into Vanessa's penthouse in the Heights. I finally reached the level I belong at. And frankly, you're just not part of the view." He walked toward the bedroom to pack the rest of his things, leaving Amelia in the suffocating silence of the living room. Her hand went to the pocket of her father's jacket. She pulled out the envelope. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. "You are never powerless. I made sure of that." With trembling fingers, she tore open the seal. Amelia's breath hitched as she pulled the contents from the thick, cream-colored envelope. She expected a heartfelt goodbye, perhaps a few $100s he had scrimped together from his meager pension. Instead, a heavy, gold-embossed card fell onto her lap. It bore a crest she didn't recognize. 2 lions flanking a shield with a stylized H. Beneath it was a letter, written in her father's steady, rhythmic script. "My dearest Amelia," it began. "If you are reading this, the world thinks I was just Arthur Richardson, the man who cleaned their mess. But my name is Arthur Sterling Hartwell III. 30 years ago, I walked away from the Hartwell empire because my father demanded I choose between $1 billion inheritance and your mother, a woman he deemed beneath our station. I chose her. I chose you. I wanted you to grow up knowing that a person's worth is measured by the dirt under their fingernails and the kindness in their heart, not the zeros in a bank account." Amelia's head spun. Hartwell? The Hartwell Industrial Group was a global titan. They owned the shipping lanes, the tech hubs, and half the skyline of the city. "I've watched Matthew for years, Amelia. I saw the way his eyes glazed over when I spoke of hard work, and the way he looked at you like an asset rather than a blessing. I knew this day would come. In this envelope, you will find the deed to the Sterling Heights estate, and the keys to a private vault at First National. The balance of the Hartwell Trust is yours now. It stands at $4.2 billion. Don't just be rich, my girl. Be powerful. Trust the plan. What are you staring at? Matthew's voice barked from the hallway. He emerged from the bedroom, hauling 2 expensive leather suitcases. Ones Amelia had bought him for his birthday by working overtime at the library. He stood over her, looking down at the papers in her hand with a sneer. Is that his will? What did the old man leave you? A collection of vintage mops? Or did he finally admit he spent your college fund on lottery tickets? Amelia quickly folded the letter, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. He left me everything I need, Matthew. Clearly, Matthew laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. He reached into his pocket and tossed a $100 bill onto the coffee table. It landed near her swollen belly. Here, consider it a tip for the services rendered during our marriage. Buy the kid some generic formula. I'd offer to stay for the birth, but Vanessa and I are flying to the Hamptons tomorrow to celebrate my promotion to senior partner. Amelia looked at the $100 bill, then up at the man she had loved for 5 years. He looked so small to her now, not physically, but spiritually. He was a man who worshipped at the altar of perceived wealth, never realizing he was standing in the presence of a queen. You're making a mistake, Matthew, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. The only mistake I made was marrying a janitor's daughter, he countered, gripping the handles of his luggage. I spent years trying to polish you up, trying to make you fit into the world I'm building. But you're just like him. Basic, cheap. You're a Honda Civic, Amelia, and I finally graduated to a Ferrari. He walked toward the door, stopping only to look back at the small, dimly lit apartment. Keep the furniture. Vanessa says it smells like poverty, anyway. I'll have my lawyer call you about the child support. Don't expect much. I'm putting most of my salary into our new joint venture. The door slammed shut, the force of it rattling the framed photos on the wall. Photos of their wedding, of their first ultrasound, of her father smiling at a backyard BBQ. Amelia didn't cry. The tears had been burned away by a cold, clarifying fire. She stood up, her movements slow and deliberate. She walked to the window and watched as Matthew loaded his suitcases into the BMW. A sleek, red Porsche pulled up behind him. Vanessa leaned out of the driver's side window, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed, a look of bored disdain on her face as she looked at Amelia's building. Matthew hopped into the passenger seat, and they sped off, the roar of the engine echoing in the quiet street. Amelia turned back to the coffee table. She picked up the manila folder Matthew had left. Divorce papers. He wanted her to sign away everything, their shared savings, the car, any claim to his future earnings. He had even included a clause waiving his right to see the baby, provided he didn't have to pay excessive support. He wants a clean break, Amelia whispered to the empty room. He has no idea he just cut himself off from the world's largest gold mine. She picked up the gold-embossed card her father had left. On the back, there was a phone number and a single name, Elias Thorne. She dialed. The phone was answered on the first ring by a voice that sounded like crushed velvet and old authority. Miss Hartwell, the voice said, we have been waiting for your call for 24 hours. Your father's security team is already stationed outside your building. Should we initiate the Sterling Protocol? Amelia looked at the divorce papers. She looked at the $100 bill on the table. She thought of the cold rain at the cemetery and the warmth in Vanessa's Instagram post. Yes, Amelia said, her voice dropping an octave, filled with a steel she never knew she possessed. Initiate the protocol, and Elias, I want to know everything about the Sterling account. Matthew is trying to close. I want to know who owns the firm he works for." "That would be you, Miss Hartwell," Elias replied calmly. "You own 60% of Sterling and Associates. You are effectively your husband's boss's boss." A slow, dangerous smile spread across Amelia's face. She rubbed her belly, feeling the baby kick again. This time it felt like a salute. "Good," Amelia said. "Then let's give Matthew the promotion he deserves." The following morning, the sun rose over the city. But for Amelia, the world looked entirely different. It was no longer a place of struggle and survival. It was a chessboard, and she held all the pieces. At 8 a.m., a fleet of 3 black Cadillac Escalades pulled up to the curb of her modest apartment building. The neighbors, mostly blue-collar workers and retirees, peered through their blinds, whispering about the men in suits standing guard at the entrance. Elias Thorne stood at the lead, a man in his 60s with silver hair and a tailored charcoal suit that screamed old money and absolute discretion. When Amelia stepped out of the lobby, she was no longer wearing her father's worn work jacket. She wore a simple, elegant maternity coat in camel hair, her hair pulled back into a sleek, low bun. "Miss Hartwell," Elias said, bowing his head slightly as he opened the door to the middle SUV. "Your father's estate in Sterling Heights has been prepared. Your medical team is already on site to ensure the baby's health. We have also taken the liberty of clearing your father's apartment of his personal effects. Everything has been moved to the vault." Amelia paused, looking back at the brick building where she had spent her life. "And the $100 on the coffee table, Elias?" "The bill has been framed, Miss Hartwell," Elias said, with a faint, knowing smile, "as a reminder of what cheap looks like." As the motorcade glided through the city, Amelia watched the skyscrapers pass by. She realized that she had walked past these buildings 1,000 times, never knowing that her name was etched into the bedrock of their foundations. Meanwhile, across town at the glass and steel headquarters of Sterling and Associates, Matthew Rich was walking on air. He strode through the lobby, his chest puffed out, nodding to the junior associates, who scrambled to stay out of his way. Vanessa was waiting for him at the elevators, looking radiant in a white silk dress that hugged her curves. "Did you do it?" she whispered, sliding her arm through his as the doors closed. "Is the burden gone?" "Signed and sealed," Matthew lied, flashing a brilliant, white-toothed smile. She didn't even fight. She knew she was outclassed. "I left her some cash for the kid and told her to move back to the gutter. She'll be lucky if she finds a trailer park by the end of the week." Vanessa giggled, pressing her head against his shoulder. "Good. I don't want any janitor germs following you into my penthouse. Now focus, Matt. The board meeting is at noon. The mysterious majority shareholder of the firm, the one who's been silent for 30 years, is sending a representative today. If we close this Sterling expansion deal, we aren't just partners, we're legends." "I was born for this, V," Matthew said, adjusting his French cuffs in the gold-tinted mirror of the elevator. "I've spent 5 years dragging an anchor behind me. Now that I'm free, there's no limit to how high I can go." Back at the Sterling Heights estate, a sprawling manor hidden behind iron gates and ancient oaks, Amelia sat in a library that smelled of leather-bound books and history. She was looking at a digital tablet Elias had provided. On the screen was a live feed of Matthew's office. She watched as Matthew and Vanessa sat in his office, laughing as they toasted with champagne. She watched as Matthew picked up a photo of Amelia from his desk, one from their honeymoon, and casually tossed it into the trash can. "He seems quite confident, doesn't he?" Amelia said, her voice cold. "Pride goeth before a fall, Miss Hartwell," Elias remarked, standing behind her. "Mr. Rich believes he is about to secure a multi-billion-dollar expansion for the firm. He doesn't realize the expansion capital is coming from the Hartwell Trust. He is essentially asking you for a loan to fund his lifestyle." "And the board meeting?" Amelia asked. "The board is anxious. They have been told that the majority owner is unhappy with the recent ethical shifts in the firm's leadership. They are expecting a representative to arrive at noon to announce a restructuring." Amelia stood up, her hand resting on her belly. The baby was quiet now, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. "I won't be sending a representative, Elias," Amelia said, turning to him. "Matthew told me I was a Honda Civic and that I wasn't part of the view. I think it's time I showed him exactly what the view looks like from the top." "Are you sure, Miss Hartwell? The doctor recommended rest." "I've rested long enough, Elias. For 5 years, I played the part of the quiet, grateful wife. I let him talk down to me, let him treat my father like a servant, and let him make me feel small. My father spent 30 years mopping floors to teach me character. Today, I use that character to clean up the trash in my own house." She looked at the clock. 11:15 a.m. "Get the car," Amelia commanded, "and call the finest tailor in the city. I need something that says, 'The Empire has returned.'" The boardroom of Sterling and Associates was a temple of glass and arrogance, perched on the 60th floor with a panoramic view of the city that Matthew Rich believed he finally owned. The long mahogany table was polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the faces of the 12 board members who sat in hushed, anxious anticipation. Matthew stood at the head of the table, adjusting his tie in the reflection of the glass wall. Beside him, Vanessa sat with her legs crossed, a tablet in front of her, looking every bit the ruthless queen consort. "Any moment now," Matthew whispered, checking his watch. "Elias Thorne himself is coming, the man who speaks for the Hartwell billions. Once he signs off on this expansion, we're moving the office to the penthouse." "I've already looked at the floor plans," Vanessa murmured, her eyes gleaming with greed. "I want the corner suite, and I want that janitor's daughter's name scrubbed from every HR record in this building. I don't want a single reminder of your poverty phase left." The double doors at the end of the room swung open with a heavy, authoritative thud. Matthew straightened his jacket, a practiced, subservient smile plastered on his face. "Mr. Thorne, it is such an honor to finally—" The smile died on his face. The words evaporated in his throat. Elias Thorne did not walk in first. He stood to the side, holding the door open with a level of deference Matthew had never seen him accord to anyone. Walking into the room, silhouetted by the midday sun, was a woman who moved with a grace that made the oxygen leave the room. She wore a custom-tailored midnight blue maternity dress made of heavy silk that draped over her 7-month belly like a royal robe. Around her neck was a strand of South Sea pearls that cost more than Matthew's BMW. Her eyes, once clouded with grief and exhaustion, were now chips of cold, brilliant sapphire. "Amelia!" Matthew's voice was a strangled wheeze. Vanessa stood up so quickly her chair nearly toppled. "What the hell is this? Security! Why is this woman in the building?" "Matthew, did you let your ex-wife sneak in through the service elevator?" Amelia didn't look at Vanessa. She didn't even acknowledge the woman's existence. She walked to the head of the table, toward the chair Matthew was currently leaning against, the seat reserved for the majority owner. "You're in my seat, Matthew," Amelia said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that seemed to vibrate the glass walls. Matthew let out a shaky, hysterical laugh. "Your seat?" "Amelia, I think the grief has finally snapped your brain. This is a board meeting for a multi-billion-dollar corporation, not a parent-teacher conference at a public school. You need to leave, now, before I have you forcibly removed." He turned to Elias, who was standing quietly by the door. "Mr. Thorne, I am so sorry for this disruption. This is my My soon-to-be ex-wife. She's clearly had a breakdown. I'll have security escort her back to her father's apartment." Elias Thorne stepped forward, his face an impenetrable mask of granite. "Mr. Rich, I suggest you lower your voice. You are speaking to the majority shareholder of Sterling and Associates. You are speaking to the chairperson of the Hartwell Trust." The room went deathly silent. One of the board members, an older man who had known Amelia's father decades ago, gasped, his eyes darting between Amelia and the gold-crested folder she placed on the table. "Majority shareholder?" Vanessa shrieked, her composure fracturing. "That's impossible. The owner is a recluse, a man." "The owner was Arthur Sterling Hartwell III, Amelia said, finally turning her gaze toward Vanessa. The sheer intensity of Amelia's stare made Vanessa flinch. "The man you called a janitor. The man whose funeral my husband skipped to buy you a ring with money he hadn't even earned yet." Amelia looked at Matthew. He was pale, his skin taking on a grey, sickly hue. He was shaking, his hands gripping the edge of the mahogany table so hard his knuckles were white. "Matthew," Amelia said softly, "you told me yesterday that I was a Honda Civic. You said you were graduating to a Ferrari. You told me that my father left me nothing but mops and lottery tickets." She opened the folder. Inside was the original charter of the firm, signed by her grandfather, and the recent transfer of power signed by her father. "My father didn't just leave me mops, Matthew. He left me the floor you're standing on. He left me the ceiling over your head. And he left me the contract that currently dictates your employment." "Amelia, honey," Matthew stammered, his voice cracking as he tried to shift into his charismatic mode. He took a step toward her, his hands reaching out. There must be a misunderstanding. Why didn't you tell me? We're a team, we're a family. All that talk about divorce, I was just stressed. The pregnancy, the work." "I didn't mean any of it!" Vanessa's head whipped toward Matthew. "Matt! What are you saying?" Amelia stepped back, avoiding his touch as if he were covered in ash. "We aren't a team, Matthew. We are a liability. And as of 10 minutes ago, I have decided to divest." She looked at the board members. "Effective immediately, the Hartwell Trust is withdrawing all expansion capital from Sterling and Associates. Furthermore, I am calling in the personal loans the firm took out last quarter. Loans secured against the personal assets of the senior partners." Matthew's eyes went wide. That would bankrupt us. That would bankrupt me." "Precisely," Amelia said. She turned to Elias. "Mr. Thorne, please escort Mr. Rich and Miss Chen from the building. Their badges have already been deactivated. Their personal belongings will be sent to them in trash bags. I believe that's the standard they're used to." "You can't do this!" Vanessa screamed, moving toward Amelia with her nails clawed. Elias Thorne moved with surprising speed for a man of his age, stepping between them. 2 large security guards appeared in the doorway behind him. "Miss Chen," Elias said, "if you touch her, you will be leaving this building in handcuffs instead of a taxi. Choose wisely." Matthew was frozen, staring at Amelia as if seeing her for the first time. The woman he had bullied, the woman he had cheated on, the woman he had left in the mud of a cemetery, was now the one who held his entire life in her palm. "Amelia, please," Matthew whispered. "Think about the baby. Our daughter." Amelia placed a hand on her belly. "My daughter will grow up knowing exactly who her father is, Matthew. She will know he was the man who traded his soul for a Ferrari, only to find out he didn't even have a driver's license." She sat down in the high-backed leather chair at the head of the table. "Security," Amelia commanded. "Clean up the trash. I have a company to run." As Matthew and Vanessa were dragged, screaming and pleading from the boardroom, Amelia felt a strange, quiet peace. But as the doors closed, Elias Thorne leaned down, whispering in her ear, "Miss Hartwell, there's one more thing. Matthew didn't just cheat. We've found evidence that he and Miss Chen have been embezzling from the Sterling account for months to fund their penthouse. They didn't just break your heart. They stole from your father." Amelia's eyes narrowed. The sweet revenge was only just beginning. The silence that followed the clearing of the boardroom was heavy with the scent of expensive cologne and the lingering stench of desperation. Amelia sat at the head of the table, her fingers tracing the edge of the gold-crested folder. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city continued to churn, oblivious to the fact that the man who thought he conquered it was currently being thrown onto the sidewalk like yesterday's news. "Elias," Amelia said, her voice sounding older than her years. "Show me. Show me exactly how much they took." Elias tapped a few commands into his tablet, and the massive 80-inch screen at the front of the room flickered to life. A complex web of shell companies, offshore accounts, and falsified invoices appeared. It was a digital map of betrayal. "It started 6 months ago, Miss Hartwell," Elias explained, his tone clinical, but his eyes burning with a protective fire, coinciding almost perfectly with your father's initial diagnosis. Matthew and Vanessa used a series of marketing consultations to funnel money out of the firm's capital reserves. They didn't think anyone was watching. Your father, even in his final weeks, had me tracking every cent. Amelia leaned forward, her eyes narrowing, as a specific transaction caught her eye. That wire transfer for $500,000, dated 2 weeks ago. What was that for? "A down payment on the penthouse in Sterling Heights," Elias replied. "And that jewelry store charge, that was the engagement ring Miss Chen was so proudly wearing. They bought their new life with your father's sweat. They literally stole the money intended for the school's new library fund to buy a pear-cut diamond." Amelia felt a surge of cold fury. It wasn't just the cheating. It was the absolute lack of respect for the man who had mopped floors to build their world. Her father had sacrificed everything to be Arthur Richardson, and Matthew had treated his legacy like a personal ATM. "I want them to feel the weight of it, Elias," Amelia said. "Not just the legal weight. I want them to feel the social vacuum. Vanessa Chen values her brand more than her soul. I want that brand incinerated." "It's already in motion, Miss Hartwell. I have alerted the Ethics Committee of the Board of Realtors and the American Marketing Association. By tonight, their names will be blacklisted from every firm in the tri-state area. But there is a complication." "What complication?" "The penthouse. The lease is in the firm's name, but they moved in this morning. Matthew has already changed the locks. To remove them legally could take weeks of eviction proceedings." Amelia stood up, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face. "Legally? Elias, I own the building. I don't need a court order to renovate my own property." 2 hours later, Matthew and Vanessa were standing in the middle of their sprawling 5,000-square-foot dream home. The walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, the floors were white marble, and the air felt like success. Or it had until 20 minutes ago. "This can't be happening," Vanessa paced the living room, her blonde hair coming undone from its perfect bun. She was still wearing the white silk dress, but it was stained with sweat and the dirt from when she'd tripped on the sidewalk outside Sterling and Associates. "She's a janitor's daughter, Matt. How does she have billions? How does she own the firm?" Matthew was slumped on the designer sofa, his head in his hands. "I don't know, V. I don't know. I saw the papers. The Hartwell Trust. It's real. We're dead. If she pulls the funding, the firm collapses. My shares are worthless." "Your shares?" Vanessa shrieked, turning on him. What about my career? What about the money we borrowed? If she audits the books, we're going to prison." "She won't audit," Matthew said, trying to convince himself. "She's too soft. Amelia doesn't have the stomach for a real fight. She'll take the win and let us fade away. She's pregnant, for God's sake. She's nesting." Just as the words left his mouth, a deafening roar echoed through the penthouse. The front doors, massive 10-foot slabs of solid oak, didn't just open. They were unceremoniously lifted off their hinges by a team of construction workers in high-visibility vests. Matthew jumped up. "What the hell are you doing? This is a private residence." A foreman stepped forward, holding a clipboard. "Sorry, pal. Orders from the owner. This unit has been flagged for immediate structural remediation. We've got a permit to remove all non-load-bearing walls and windows starting now." Behind the workers, Amelia stepped into the foyer. She was flanked by Elias and 4 security guards. She looked at the marble floors, then at the champagne bottle chilling in a silver bucket on the counter. "I decided the white marble was a bit cheap, Matthew," Amelia said, her voice echoing in the now doorless space. "I'm having it jackhammered out, and the windows, they're the wrong shade of blue. They're being removed for the next 48 hours. You can't do this," Vanessa screamed, rushing toward Amelia. "We have a lease. We have rights." "You had a lease with Sterling and Associates," Amelia countered calmly. "Since you were fired for cause this afternoon, your corporate housing perk has been revoked. As for your rights, you currently have the right to remain silent while my legal team files the embezzlement charges with the district attorney." Amelia walked over to the kitchen island and picked up the champagne bucket. She poured the ice-cold water onto the marble floor. "You told me I was a Honda Civic, Matthew," Amelia said, looking him dead in the eye. "Right now, you're standing in a house with no doors and no windows, and in 5 minutes, you'll have no floor. I'd say you're currently a broken-down tricycle." "Amelia, please!" Matthew fell to his knees, the arrogance finally shattered. "I made a mistake. I'll pay it back. I'll do whatever you want. Think of the baby. I can be a father to her. I can help you." "The baby?" Amelia laughed, a sound so cold it made the construction workers pause. "You signed the waiver, Matthew. You told me you didn't want to be burdened by biology. My daughter will never know your name. She will only know the name Hartwell." She turned to the foreman. "Start the jackhammers, and make sure to get the dust on the white silk dress. I hear it's hard to clean." As the first hammer hit the marble with a bone-jarring crack, Vanessa began to wail, a raw, primal sound of total defeat. Matthew just sat in the dust, his expensive suit turning grey, realizing that he hadn't just lost a billionaire, he had lost his soul. But as Amelia walked back toward the elevators, Elias Thorne stopped her, his expression grim. "Miss Hartwell, we have a problem. Vanessa's brother. He's not just a marketing executive. He has ties to some very aggressive debt collectors, and it seems he just arrived in the city. While Amelia was transforming into the titan she was born to be, Matthew and Vanessa were descending into a hell of their own making. They were currently huddled in a grimy, 2-star motel on the outskirts of the city, the only place that would take a cash payment without a credit check. Vanessa sat on the edge of the stained polyester bedspread, her white silk dress now a rag of grey dust and tears. Her phone had been blowing up for hours. "Blacklisted," she whispered, staring at a screen filled with vitriolic emails. "I'm blacklisted from every agency in the country. My LinkedIn is a cemetery, Matt. And the embezzlement charges. The DA's office just issued a statement." Matthew was pacing the small room, his eyes bloodshot. "It's not just the law, V. It's the money we took. We didn't just take it from the firm. We took it from the special projects account your brother was managing." As if on cue, The door to the motel room didn't just open, it was kicked in. Victor Chen stepped into the room. He didn't look like a marketing executive. He wore a black leather jacket, and his knuckles were scarred from a lifetime of being the fixer for Vanessa's mistakes. Behind him stood two men who looked like they belonged in a back-alley cage match. "Victor!" Vanessa scrambled toward him. "You have to help us. Amelia. She's a monster. She took everything." Victor didn't offer a hand to his sister. He looked at her with a disgust that made her flinch. "You stupid girl. You told me the Hartwell connection was a ghost. You told me the husband had the janitor's daughter under his thumb. Because of your marketing consultations, $5 million of my associate's money has been frozen by the Hartwell Trust." He turned his gaze to Matthew, who was shaking so hard his teeth were chattering. "And you, the king of real estate, you're the one who signed the invoices." I can get it back," Matthew stammered. "Amelia is weak. She's still in love with me, deep down. She's just acting out because of the pregnancy. If I can just get to her, I can talk her into a settlement." Victor smiled, a slow, terrifying movement of his lips. "You aren't going to talk to her, Matthew. You're going to be my leverage. Amelia Richardson Hartwell is having her grand debut tomorrow night at the Metropolitan Gala. She's launching a foundation for powerless women. I think it's only fair she shares some of that power with the family she's trying to destroy." The Metropolitan Gala was the social event of the decade. The elite of the world were gathered in a sea of tuxedos and haute couture, but the only name on anyone's lips was Hartwell. Amelia arrived in a custom-made gown of midnight velvet, a cape of silk organza trailing behind her like a storm cloud. She wore the heart of the Empire sapphire around her neck, a stone that had been in the Hartwell family for 4 generations. She looked like a goddess of vengeance, her pregnancy only adding to her aura of ancient, maternal power. As she stood on the grand staircase, Elias Thorne leaned in. "They're here, Miss Hartwell. Victor Chen and Matthew. They've bypassed the perimeter security. It seems Matthew still had an old emergency access code for the building's service entrance." "Let them in, Elias," Amelia said, her voice a calm, steady rhythm. "A queen doesn't hide from the court. She waits for the jesters to finish their dance." The gala was in full swing when the double doors of the ballroom burst open. The music died. The elite of the city turned in shock as Matthew, looking disheveled and frantic, stumbled into the room, followed by the menacing presence of Victor Chen. "Amelia!" Matthew shrieked, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. Tell them it was all a game. Tell them you're taking me back." The crowd gasped. The cameras of the paparazzi began to flash like 1,000 tiny suns. Vanessa stood behind them, her face a mask of desperation and malice. Amelia didn't move. She stood at the top of the stairs, looking down at them with a pity that was more devastating than any insult. "Matthew," she said, her voice projected perfectly through the hushed room. "I told you once that you weren't part of the view. Why have you come to ruin the scenery?" "You stole my life," Matthew screamed, emboldened by the muscle behind him. "You used your father's blood money to trap me. You're the one who committed fraud. You faked the poverty. You faked the struggle. You're a liar, Amelia." Victor stepped forward, his hand moving toward his jacket. "Enough talk. We're here for the trust, Miss Hartwell. 5 million in liquid assets, transferred now, or this gala becomes a crime scene. I don't care about your family name. I care about my debt." The socialites began to murmur in terror, backing away, but Amelia simply took a sip of her sparkling cider. "Victor," Amelia said, "you think you're the only one in this room who knows how to use muscle. You think my father spent 30 years mopping floors without learning who really runs this city? She snapped her fingers. Suddenly, the waiters at the gala, men who had been quietly serving champagne all night, dropped their trays. In one synchronized movement, 20 elite security operatives, former special forces, surrounded Victor and his men. But the real shock came when the doors behind Victor opened once more. A man walked in. He was in his 80s, leaning on a cane, but he carried an authority that made even Victor Chen turn pale. It was Marcus Sterling, Amelia's grandfather, the man who had supposedly disowned her father 30 years ago. "Grandfather?" Amelia whispered, her eyes filling with the first genuine tears of the night. "I didn't disown him, Amelia," the old man said, his voice like rolling thunder. "Arthur told me he wanted to raise a child who knew the value of $1. He told me to stay away until she was ready. He sent me a letter 3 weeks ago. He told me it was time to come home." Marcus Sterling looked at Matthew, then at Victor. "You've been threatening my granddaughter," the old man said. "That was your final mistake." The silence in the Metropolitan Ballroom was so absolute that the sound of Marcus Sterling's cane striking the marble floor echoed like a gunshot. The guests, the most powerful people in the city, stood frozen, watching a legend return from the shadows. "Arthur didn't leave you because of a feud," Marcus said, his voice gravelly but unshakable as he stepped closer to the shivering Victor Chen. "He left because he wanted to be a man worthy of the woman he loved, and he wanted his daughter to grow up away from people like you. People who think money is a shield for cowardice." Matthew looked at the old man, then at Amelia, his mind frantically trying to find a way to pivot. "Grandfather Sterling, I'm Matthew, Arthur's son-in-law. I've been looking after Amelia. This is all a huge misunderstanding. These men, they forced me to come here." Vanessa's head snapped toward Matthew, her eyes wide with fury. "You coward! You told me Victor was the only way to get the money back. You signed the papers." Amelia stepped down the stairs, her velvet gown whispering against the stone. She stopped 3 feet from Matthew. The sapphire at her throat glowed in the light of the chandeliers, but her eyes were colder. "You really don't get it, do you, Matthew?" Amelia asked. "You thought the view was the penthouse. You thought the view was the board meetings. But the view from the top includes seeing the traps being set beneath you." She looked at Victor Chen. "You think you're a dragon, Victor? You're a lizard in a leather jacket. Every wire transfer you made, every marketing consultation you used to launder that $5 million, Elias didn't just track it, he facilitated it. We made it so easy for you that you didn't even notice the Federal Bureau of Investigation was the one hosting your offshore servers." Victor's face went from pale to a sickly, translucent white. He reached for the inside of his jacket, but before his hand could move an inch, 4 waiters had him pinned against a gilded pillar, his arms twisted behind his back. "Victor Chen!" A voice boomed from the ballroom entrance. A man in a dark suit with an FBI badge around his neck stepped forward. "You're under arrest for interstate wire fraud, embezzlement, and racketeering." As the agents moved in to cuff Victor's associates, Vanessa began to scream, a shrill, hysterical sound that cut through the elegance of the room. "I didn't do anything. It was Matthew. He's the one who wanted the life. He's the one who said his wife was a nobody." "Vanessa Chen," the agent continued, "you're also under arrest for conspiracy and grand larceny." Matthew stood in the center of the ballroom, the space around him emptying as the elite guests moved away like a receding tide. He was alone. Truly, utterly alone. He looked at Amelia, his lips trembling. "Amelia, please. I'm the father of your child. You can't let them take me. Think of the scandal. Think of our daughter's name." Amelia's grandfather, Marcus, stepped beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder. It was the first time Amelia had felt the physical weight of her dynasty, and it felt like armor. "Her name is Hartwell," Amelia said, her voice echoing with a finality that silenced the room. "And you aren't the father of my child, Matthew. You were just a biological donor who failed the character test. You told me yesterday that you were a Ferrari and I was a Honda Civic. Well, the Ferrari is being towed to a federal impound lot." Matthew reached out, a desperate clawing motion, but Elias Thorne stepped into his path. "Mr. Rich," Elias said with a thin, sharp smile, "your ride is here. And don't worry about your belongings. We've already delivered the trash bags to the county jail." The paparazzi cameras went into a frenzy as Matthew Rich, the man who wanted to be a king, was led out of the Metropolitan Gala in handcuffs, his expensive tuxedo jacket pulled over his head in a futile attempt to hide his shame. Vanessa followed, weeping and cursing, her white silk dress now a symbol of her absolute ruin. The ballroom remained quiet for a long moment after the doors closed. Amelia turned to her grandfather. "He really mopped floors for 30 years just for me?" she whispered. "No, Amelia," Marcus Sterling said, his eyes softening as he looked at her. "He did it for himself, too. He wanted to be sure that when you finally stood in this room, you wouldn't be like those people being led away in chains. He wanted you to be a Hartwell who knew that the most important thing you can clean is your own soul." Amelia looked out at the sea of socialites, the people who had been ready to judge her or worship her based on a bank balance. She felt the baby kick, a strong, vibrant movement. "Elias," Amelia said, turning to her advisor. "Yes, Miss Hartwell. The foundation. I want to double the endowment, and I want the first shelter we build to be named after Arthur Richardson. I want everyone to know that a janitor built this empire." She walked back up the grand staircase, her head held high. The revenge was sweet, but the peace was better. However, as she reached the top, she saw a single, crumpled piece of paper on the floor where Matthew had stood. She picked it up. It was a sonogram, the very first one they had ever taken. On the back, in Matthew's handwriting, were the words, "Ticket to the top." The final piece of her heart that had held any warmth for him turned to ice. She handed the paper to Elias. "Burn this," she said, "and prepare the car. It's time to go home." 5 years later, the morning sun bathed the city in a warm, golden glow. Amelia stood in the hallway of the Arthur Richardson Elementary School, the very place where her father had spent 3 decades of his life. The air still smelled faintly of pine cleaner and floor wax, a scent that used to mean poverty to her, but now meant the purest form of integrity. She wasn't there to clean. She was there to open the new state-of-the-art STEM wing, funded entirely by the Richardson Hartwell Foundation. "Mama, look, Grandpa's picture is so big." Amelia looked down at 5-year-old Naomi. The girl was a mirror image of her mother, but she had Arthur's kind, observant eyes. Naomi was pointing at a massive bronze plaque near the entrance. It didn't list Arthur's titles or his billions. It simply said, Arthur Richardson. He saw the worth in everyone. "It is big, Naomi," Amelia whispered, squeezing her daughter's hand, "because he had the biggest heart in the world." Elias Thorne stepped up beside them, looking remarkably unchanged, though his smile was more frequent these days. "The board is ready for you, Miss Hartwell, and the press. They want to know about the new scholarship program." "In a moment, Elias," Amelia said, her gaze drifting toward the school's front gates. A rusted, silver sedan had pulled up to the curb. A man stepped out. He looked twice his age, his hair thinning, and his skin sallow. Matthew Rich had been out of prison for 6 months after serving a reduced sentence for his cooperation against Victor Chen. He now worked as a night shift security guard at a warehouse, a job he had only secured because Amelia hadn't bothered to block it. He stood at the gates, clutching a small, cheap stuffed bear. He watched Naomi skip toward a group of her friends. He looked like a ghost, haunting a life he was no longer allowed to touch. He made a move toward the entrance, but 2 of Amelia's security team, men who looked like mountains in tailored suits, stepped into his path. Matthew's shoulders slumped. He looked up and caught Amelia's eye through the glass doors. There was no anger in Amelia's expression, no triumph. There was only a profound, chilling indifference. She didn't hate him anymore. To hate him would be to grant him a place in her heart. To Amelia, Matthew Rich was simply a stranger who had once mistaken a diamond for a stone. She turned her back on him, walking toward the podium where the cameras were waiting. Vanessa Chen's fate had been even more poetic. After her release, she had fled to a distant city, working a low-paying desk job at a trucking company under an assumed name. She lived in a cramped studio apartment that overlooked a parking garage. Every night, the sound of car engines reminded her of the scream that had echoed in Sterling Heights, the moment she realized she had traded her soul for a man who owned nothing. Amelia stood before the microphone, the heart of the empire sapphire sparkling on her neck. "People often ask me what the best revenge is," Amelia told the crowd, her voice steady and resonant. "They think it's the billions. They think it's seeing your enemies fall. But they're wrong. The best revenge is building a life so full, so beautiful, and so meaningful that you eventually forget your enemies even existed. My father taught me that true power isn't what you take from the world. It's what you leave behind when you're gone." As the audience erupted in applause, Amelia felt a warm breeze. For a second, she could almost smell the faint scent of peppermint and pine sol. She looked at Naomi, who was laughing as she cut the ribbon with a pair of oversized golden scissors. The plan was complete. The janitor's daughter wasn't just wealthy. She was finally, truly free. Amelia's journey reminds us that the people who walk away from you during your darkest hour are often doing you the greatest favor of your life. They are clearing the space for the destiny you were always meant to inhabit. Real wealth isn't found in a bank vault or a penthouse. It's found in the character to endure betrayal and the grace to rise above it. Amelia didn't win because she inherited billions. She won because she stayed true to the man who mopped floors so she could reach the stars. If this story of betrayal and ultimate justice moved you, please show your support. Hit the like button, share this video with someone who needs to know their worth, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss a story that proves karma always finds its way home. Comment below with "I am powerful" if you believe that your value is defined by your heart, not your circumstances. Thank you for watching, and remember, the best revenge is living a life that makes your ancestors proud.